Last Saturday, my daughter and I took one of our trips to the flea market, a little ways outside of our home in Asheville. She is 15, so she ran off to the card and gaming shop at one end, leaving me to take my time browsing the stalls. I ended up taking home a box of restaurant-grade cooking stuff for a good price, and those stainless steel heavy whisks can't be beat. When we got home, I took everything out to clean it and found a little spiral notebook at the bottom of the box. I've written down what I read in there for y'all to hear. I woke up for work about an hour before my shift at dusk. I made my way around my part of the duplex as I dressed myself in my crappy work clothes. I listened to Audrey snore, still sound asleep from her shift the night before. It felt like it had been weeks since I had actually seen Audrey. She was always snoring by the time that I got home and always gone by the time that I woke up. I didn't pass her on my way to or from the restaurant anymore either. I left as sunset faded into dusk, another part of the ritual that I participate in every other day. I haven't ever had a specific starting time for my shifts. I've always arrived at dusk and left at dawn, and it's always worked. The evenings in the mountains get cold quickly even during late spring. It's a different climate from the rest of the South, so I was still wearing a hoodie on most of my walks to work. I must have left a little later than that night, for the sky was already stained purple in the direction of the sinking sun, and a smattering of stars were visible behind me. The wooden steps of the duplex were dark and slick with rainwater, so I descended them carefully on my way down to the clearing. The two-story cabin-style duplex that I share with my coworkers sits on the edge of the tree line with its back to untamed wilderness and its front to a meadow that is currently washed with ankle-high yellow flowers the size of my thumbnail. It's beautiful, but I've noticed that walking through the flowers tires me out and it makes it hard to breathe. I've stopped smoking on the way to work and it's helped out a little. I left too late that night, and I think that was the first rule, although unwritten, that I broke. The flowers weren't bothering me much, but the fog that had settled after the day's rain was. It was making it hard for me to see, and if the restaurant wasn't a straight shot from our quarters, I may have been in trouble. I blamed the feelings of unease that started as soon as my feet left the bottom step on the fog, and I made my way to work. I knew that it wasn't the fog that had me feeling watched. This had happened to me a few times before, but only when I had first started, and it was trying to scare me. Don't turn around, no matter what. I had been advised. The feeling of multiple sets of eyes boring into my back of my head put my hair on end, but it wasn't something that I was unused to. It was a rule that the little two-part door that separated my kitchen from the front of house had to remain open. So I was more than accustomed to having the back of my head watched as I went about preparing orders. If our customers weren't talking to the other staff member or one another, they were watching me. It was the smell that put the pep in my step. If you've ever put your face in a box of old portobello mushrooms, then you won't have trouble imagining the scent that suddenly overpowered the stuffy, wet smell of fog. But the earthy smell was soured by the sharp, body fungus odor that accompanied it. The scent of athlete's foot came in waves that corresponded with the sound of a dragging pair of feet. I had felt it watching. I had even smelled it. But never before had I heard its unique, lopsided gait. It sounded like it walked with an injury, and its steps echoed as though placed on a wooden deck instead of a solid, grassy ground. Just as with the smell, the sound appeared without any build-up or steady approach. It was simply absent one moment, and unignorable the next. Though I picked up my pace, I didn't run. I knew that if I acknowledged it, it won. It wasn't my job to acknowledge it or anything else anyway. I just make the food. It continued to thump and drag along behind me, and I started whistling a tuneless song to show that I wasn't bothered as I speed walked up the hill. The flowers were making it hard to catch my breath and to keep whistling, but I persisted. I could see the warm orange glow of the street lamp in the parking lot at the top of the hill, and I relaxed a little, but I didn't dare slow down. Behind me, an unwanted accompaniment joined my whistling. The sound grew in pitch and reminded me of when my college friend would test her homemade oboe reeds. I jogged the rest of the way. The musk dissipated when I hopped up the step on the back deck to safety, and the fog cleared without warning as well. I slipped through the back door and I shut it tight. I leaned against the door and I breathed in deep, trying to slow my pounding heart and return to normal. "You okay, little one?" I was relieved that Adrian had, for once, arrived before me. He was seated at the bar, counting out his drawer, as I tried to smile and offer reassurance that I was indeed okay. Since he had been there longer than any of us, Adrian probably had a good idea of what happened and didn't question me, instead returning to his count as I straightened up and headed into the kitchen to start my night. Because Adrian and I had the same name, Adrian and Adrienne, he had taken to calling me a Low One, which Audrey had adopted as well when I would still see her. She and Adrian were good friends, but now neither of us see her much. She works exclusively with the other cook, Avery, who lives on the ground level of the duplex with Adrian. I've never met Avery, but he does a good job closing up. Working for this little roadside restaurant and bar comes with more oddities outside of scheduling. We never get shipments or trucks. The food is always stocked, and I only have to do a little prep on my nights. The beer and liquor are always full and ready as well. Even on our busy nights, I've never seen Adrian blow a keg, and I've never had him to tell me to 86 a menu item. In that regard, it's a very easy job. The customers are what makes it difficult, but that's how it always is. Adrian told me that I got lucky after my first week. It was the dead of winter and slower than usual, so all of our business came by way of weary late-night travelers. One such traveler stuck out. I assumed he was just a peculiar guy with some money and a love of vintage clothing, for he was all bundled up in a long wool peacoat and a plaid scarf. With not much else to do, I leaned on the kitchen door and listened to him make small talk with Adrian as he ate the food that I had prepared for him. After he paid his tab, he stood and pulled on a pair of leather driving gloves. "You know," he said, "I drive this route every winter on the way to my parents' house in Landrum. You know where Landrum is?" I watched Adrian nod and open his mouth to offer a personal anecdote, but the man cut him off before he could. "And I've never seen this place before. You're a fine barkeep." Adrian thanked him, and not long after I heard the front door open and fall shut, marking the departure of the night's only patron. Adrian met me at the door, then telling me that I'd had it easy for my first week. I offered little more than a sarcastic, "Oh, really?" in response. Being so new to the workplace, I was still shy and hesitant in conversation with my new coworkers. This would change a few days later, when I witnessed my first seasonal regular. Wet, heavy snow fell over those next few days and business slowed to a halt. After warming up from my icy trudge to work, I spent my shifts doing not much else besides listening to Adrian talk about his life outside of work. He went on about girls that he knew back home, how he couldn't wait to see his daughter and take her to Lake Lure, and so on, which was a pleasantly normal reprieve from this off-kilter place. It was an unusually hostile night, where the snow fell hard and fast and the wind's mournful song was almost louder than the speaker in the kitchen, when the unexpected sound of the front door took Adrian's attention from whatever story he had been telling me. I listened to him greet his customers, ever casual, and didn't bother to stand up from where I was kneeling to scrub the wall under a prep table. I then realized that I could smell campfire smoke. The smell grew to overwhelm the rest of the kitchen smells, ultimately becoming so strong that it reminded me of standing right in the middle of a plume of bonfire smoke. I got up to investigate. At first glance, the dining room and bar were empty save for Adrian, who was occupying himself by wiping the bar down. The lights were dimmer than usual, but nothing seemed out of place. My eyes were drawn to the corner of the room closest to the front door, though the space appeared to be empty. When my eyes adjusted, I discovered that in the corner, hardly distinguishable from the wooden walls, a figure stood, unmoving. The bipedal figure was made entirely out of loosely bundled sticks. It had a stiff, handmade look to it, a stick doll the size of an adult man and standing on its own. Its head consisted of long, flexible switches that formed a loop like the eye of a needle. The first one I noticed was accompanied by two others. One stickman stood in the corner by the back door, and the other startled me when I noticed it in the corner to the left of the kitchen door. They didn't do anything but stand there and look unsettling. Adrian ignored them and moved on to washing glasses in the bar sink. I stared at the one by the front door for a while, my mind reeling as I tried to figure the thing out. I felt that I should ignore them too, but something about their presence was mesmerizing. They weren't doing anything, but my eyes wanted nothing more than to stare through the hole in their stick heads. A face should have fit in that blank oval, anything to fill the negative space. Eventually, they moved. In unison, the stickmen left their corners walking, if you can call it that, with purpose to the corner recently vacated by their companion to the left. Their movement was stiff and awkward, and exactly what you would expect from something with no knees or hips. The bundled sticks that comprised their rudimentary appendages shuddered as they walked, as though a strong wind was blowing through them, despite the restaurant's stagnant airflow. The sound that accompanied their steady journey was also that of wind through barren branches, much like the sound of the forest behind the duplex at this time of year. Before they settled in place, I took my attention away from them and found another chore to busy myself with for the duration of their stay. Eventually, Adrian reappeared in the kitchen threshold to tell me that they were gone. When I asked him what the heck that was all about, he offered no explanation, other than that they came in during snowstorms and were terrible tippers. I haven't seen them again, but the mobile stickmen were far from the last strange seasonal regular. The winter brought more strangely dressed but seemingly human customers, including a peculiar old man without any hair at all, and a hooked nose with red spider-webbed cracks at its point. He wore nothing save for navy blue long johns and cleared 2 full handles of green label Evan Williams in an hour. There's also a party of 6 creatures with oily feathers, skinny human legs and blank, white barn owl faces that push 2 tables together, make a racket all night. They always leave a mess, but Adrian says that he makes good money when they come in. Since spring started, a group of 3 women in sheer black gowns have started coming in to eat and drink. I'm not sure how they do it, for their faces lack visible mouths and instead resemble a long-nosed theater mask made from thinly stretched pale flesh. Their eyes are almond-shaped and completely green, devoid of sclera or pupils. Every other night, I make food for these creatures and more, some not worth describing and some completely indescribable. The money is good, but it doesn't seem like I'll ever get a chance to spend it on anything. All of my material necessities are accounted for, so I don't have any reason to work other than that I feel I absolutely have to. Aside from being followed on my way to work by an unseen, mushroom-scented entity, this night was promising to be like any other. I was going through the motions of setting up for business, and Adrian was doing the same. We were laughing and chatting like any other coworkers at any other restaurant, and the terrifying encounter I'd had on my way to work was soon at the back of my mind. It was nearly time to unlock the front door when I heard Adrian let out an exasperated groan. I poked my head out to ask him what was wrong, and found him staring at a folded piece of paper with narrowed eyes. I asked him what was up. "Audrey couldn't have done a better job at hiding this from me," he said, waving the paper around. "Now I gotta bust my butt to have it posted before opening." "What's that?" I asked. "Just the stupid regulation notice the bosses want posted across the street at the start of every month." I frowned. This was the first that I had heard about it, but it wasn't completely weird given what passes for normal around here. "I'll be right back," Adrian said as he pulled on his jacket. A bolt of nervous lightning struck me when I realized that Adrian was about to leave me alone in here. I had been alone at the restaurant before, but never for long, never after being antagonized like I had been that evening. I felt like a wimp when I sheepishly asked if I could come with him across the street. My unease must have been written on my face, for he agreed without hesitation. I grabbed my hoodie from the back and I pulled it over my head as I followed him out. Adrian locked the front door behind us and we stepped off the concrete front patio into the gravel roadside parking lot. The clouds that had dominated the day had returned and were now casting downy shadows over the moon as they moved across the sky. As we approached the asphalt river that the bar had banked on, I thought that it looked wider than I had remembered. The reflectors through its middle were hardly visible in the cloud cover, and the shadowy shapes beyond the other side of the road were a scrambled mess of black and deep blue. The pool of orange from the streetlights in the parking lot felt like a point of no return, the final docking station before a faithless leap into nothingness. Beside me, Adrian sighed, his breath becoming smoke in the chilly mountain air. He clutched my hand without warning and pulled me along across the weathered street. My night vision was worse than I had expected, for the large tree and its fledgling greenery didn't come into view until we were halfway across the street. The massive, ancient tree stood out from the rest of the tree line, lying in wait for us. When we reached it, Adrian led the way to the side of its trunk farthest from the road, where I noticed a carved hollow at its base. A white woven basket sat empty in it. I stared at the curious basket as Adrian unfolded this month's rolls and prepared to stick them on the tree. I turned my gaze from the basket to the previous rule sheet, which was still pinned to the tree trunk by 2 nails. The note appeared to have been printed off from a computer, and its words in black ink were discolored and smeared from weeks of weather. Adrian swore under his breath upon reading the last line. It read in bold font, "Come alone." I scanned the rest of the rules, finding them very mundane. They didn't seem to apply to us. I looked up at Adrian with raised eyebrows, but he continued staring at the sheet of paper. "What does that mean?" I asked. The panic in Adrian's eyes had not yet reached me. He shook his head. "How were you supposed to know?" I said. "I'll take the blame." I reassured him as he tore down the old note and stuck the new one on the nails. How would the boss even find out? It was disturbing me how quickly his jovial demeanor had turned. "They might be playing a joke," he said, his voice scarcely a whisper. "Yep, come on now." I grabbed his wrist and began leading him around the tree to return to our roadside sanctuary. The light in the parking lot looked so far away from here, like the road had stretched and widened. We had almost reached it when the headlights had appeared, and the lights were blinding LEDs, those oppressively bright lights that almost looked blue in their intensity. They didn't approach, they only appeared, suddenly and far closer to us than they should have been, as though their source had been waiting for our approach to switch them on. They were accompanied by what I believed to be the sound of an idling engine. We stopped short, squinting in the lights, barely making out the hulking black shape that they belonged to. Adrian stepped back to the grass first, dragging me with him. The thing, which I knew had to be a vehicle, reversed back up the road as we did. I looked up at Adrian, who was focused on the vehicle, glaring at it, daring it to try something. When we stepped forward, the truck inched forward with us. It moved effortlessly in time with our steps, posing as a threat and yet lulling us into the belief that its movement was predictable. Adrian backed us up so that we were in line with the rural tree. From that point, the truck's lights were its only visible part, and they illuminated the road before us. Adrian dropped my trembling hand. I heard him say, "Screw it," before he ran out into the high beams. The thing that ran head-on into Adrian was neither organic nor machine. It seemed to clip into existence right as Adrian reached the middle of the road, jolting forward on 4 still legs. As its flat, mothless head and the pale spikes of its antlers made contact with Adrian's body, so small and frail in comparison, the light in its round, blank LED eyeballs flickered. What we had believed to be the sounds of an idling engine got louder when it hit him, sounding more like the scream of a mountain lion made by scraping, grinding pieces of metal. I screamed while I watched as my friend was skewered and then tossed over the creature's stretched, fawn-colored back and onto the asphalt. The thing continued its lurching sprint down the road, unbothered by the obstacle that it had overtaken. My legs buckled and my head became light with the force of the air leaving my lungs and throat in a shocked, fearful wail. I didn't look both ways before I fled to Adrian's side. I fell hard to my knees without noticing the pain and blood from skinning them. As I brushed his brown hair from his forehead, I had to force myself not to look down at the mangled mess of his upper body, made by the forceful impact of those antlers. Adrian's eyes were trying to focus while I promised that I would get help and that he would be okay. The arm that hadn't been punctured reached aimlessly around before I caught it, accidentally glimpsing a deep, red-black hole between his ribs. I could hear Adrian croak out something about Lake Lure before he winced and screwed his eyes shut from the pain. He became unresponsive, and my shouts became louder. I must have blacked out not long after, for the last thing I remember before waking up in my bed is apologizing to Adrian. I sat bolt upright, sweaty and teary-eyed, and realized that I could hear Avery snoring from her room. It was only then, as my reality shifted into focus, that I could almost believe that night had been a dream. I tried my best to shake it off and get ready for work. When I left, the sun was setting, and the field of yellow flowers was alive with the whirring chitter of insects and bird calls. It must have been a lovely day, judging by the fading sunset colors, but not that I had been awake to appreciate it. Sometimes, this secret place is beautiful, but that did little to help the fact that I still couldn't shake the feeling that the events of 2 nights ago were real, and not just some long, horrible dream. My walk to the restaurant was uneventful. Even the flowers seemed to leave me alone, and it gave me enough time to decide over a cigarette that if Adrian showed up tonight, I could come to terms with having only dreamt seeing him impaled on the antlers of a monster. Though the emotions I felt upon waking were genuine, they were fading, becoming hazy like dreams do, and taking the dreadful images with them. I wished the walk to work could have been longer, for the sight of the bar at the top of the hill filled me with dread tonight. I took a deep breath before pushing the door open, savoring the last few seconds of uncertainty, knowing that these were the last moments where I would not know for sure if Adrian was alive or dead. Immediate nausea struck me when I found the restaurant empty. I called out for Adrian and I checked the bathrooms and kitchen, before sinking down on the floor, miserably accepting that he was gone and that I had had a selfish hand in it. After trying to cry and wondering in frustration why my body wouldn't let me, it occurred to me that I could have checked for these scrapes on my knees as proof. Unsure as to why I hadn't remembered that sooner, I yanked my jeans up over my calves and struggled when I got the bunched fabric up to my knees. As soon as the bottom of a fresh scab became visible, I heard the back door close. I startled and looked up at Adrian standing in front of me, completely uninjured, carrying a sweatshirt in the arm that I knew I had seen bloody and broken. "What you doing down there, little one?" he asked, apparently finding it amusing that I was looking frightened on the floor, with my jeans bunched up to my knees. "Adrian!" Relief flooded through me as I pulled myself up from the floor beside the bar. I don't remember all that I said when I started in on him, but it must have included many expletives, questions, and an incoherent recount of what had happened, for he was clearly nonplussed by the time that I contained myself. The response Adrian offered was the last that I had expected. He said, "That's terrifying, but you know my name's not Adrian." "What?" "Yeah, it's Benny. Stop messing with me, girl, you know my name. We've worked together for months." He started going about his routine for setting up, looking around behind the bar and informing me that Audrey hadn't left any hidden notes for him tonight. I stood there and stared at him, dumbfounded. He headed back into the kitchen to pull the drawer from the safe. When he returned and saw me still standing there, grappling with my own experiences, he asked me if everything was okay. I was lost for words. "If you're feeling sick and need tonight off, that's no problem," he said, trying his best to help. I shook my head and I waved him off. I couldn't deny that. For all I knew about him, he was acting exactly as he would in this situation. His mannerisms, voice, and appearance were the same, as they had been before I had gotten him killed. He even seemed to remember the folded-up rule sheet behind the bar and the nickname that he had given me. If I could only accept his insistence on his name having been Benny all this time, I could continue on with my life. So I assured him that I would be fine, and I went on to start my work night. I was in deep thought, searching for an explanation or some way to rationalize this turn of events, when Adrian, or Benny, or whoever the heck he is, entered the kitchen. He looked over the shelf above the compartmentalized kitchen sink, searching for something along the cardboard boxes. "You can't let this place get to you too much, you know. I used to have vivid dreams that I swore were real too, but I don't dream anymore." He pulled the stepladder out from beside the standing freezer and climbed up to reach a box of black plastic forks stored on the shelf. I conceded that he was right, therefore admitting that I had surely only been dreaming. Sure, I had only dreamt up these scabs on my knees from falling on the street beside his punctured, bloody body. I had dreamt that antlered, mechanical animal that had hit and killed him. I had dreamt the last several months where he had been named Adrian. I dreamt the night we met and laughed when we found out that we had the same name. I had been forced to accept everything else about this place that was horrifying and wrong, so I could accept that I was wrong as well. Right. And that's why I've written all this down. I need a concrete record that I can return to, because I know what I saw, and I am sure of my experiences. But it is clear to me that the entities controlling this place are capable of returning their servants, their employees from death, and rewriting our memories. It's all that I can do. I know that I cannot escape and will continue working, even beyond death. But they would have you believe that what we're meant to do, it's the same for everyone else. So why am I so afraid? That's everything written in there. The rest of the pages are blank. The sensible part of me thinks it's just someone's pet project or something. But there's a reason that I posted it here anyway and haven't shown my daughter. Her dad, my ex-husband, disappeared somewhere on the mountain roads when he was coming to pick her up for summer vacation 8 years ago. He was planning to take her to Lake Lure.